Greetings, everyone. My name is Timothy Furey. I'm a fellow at the London Center for Policy Research, and we're here for another edition of Thought to Action. Just before we begin, I'd like to ask everybody, or remind everybody, to visit us on YouTube and Rumble, and also join our community on Patreon. And if you like any of the content from any of our pieces, please feel free to share with your friends, family, and community. We love the support, and this information is only useful if it gets out there. So I'm here. Today's a very special day for me. I'm here with somebody whose content I have been reading for well over 20 years now, not to date myself, but I have considered myself a 20+ year civil rights activist. And one of the things I focus on is issues with regards to gun rights from a social justice perspective, and looking at issues coming from New York City with regards to licensing, suppression, and other discrimination. And one of the pieces that I just put out alongside the London set was a piece called Gun Control's Black Lives Matter Problems, that really explore a lot of these issues. And so it's an honor to be here today with Alan Gottlieb. He is the Executive Vice President and founder of the Second Amendment Foundation, and he has been researching and discussing these issues since the 1970s. And so it's great to have you on, Alan. And we are here, as much as I am honored to be interviewing, we are here today because of President Biden's executive orders and other long-awaited gun control announcement in the Rose Garden last week. And as part of that, he discussed issues of 4 main points: looking at gun trafficking, a ban on ghost guns, a study on the expansion of red flag laws, and also a ban on pistol braces, as well as other issues that he hoped that Congress would take forward, which I hope to get to later. But I'd first like to start, Alan, if you can discuss a little bit more about what you think of these actions and what some of the things that you plan as a leader of the SAF, of what you'd like to do going forward to combat it.
Well, Timothy, first, thank you for all the kind words and having me on the program. I really appreciate it. I obviously am not in support of anything that President Biden is doing in the whole area of attacking gun rights. And so we're planning from the Second Amendment Foundation to actually go to court on some of these. We're sitting in a slight holding pattern because, as you know, the president's executive order ordered the Justice Department in 30 days and 60 days to kick in with some of this. So we're going to have to wait 30 days for some of it and 60 days for some more of it, unless he comes through with it sooner. And so we will be going to court challenging a lot of this. They like to use the term ghost guns, guns without serial numbers. But what they're really talking about is stopping people from making their own firearms in their own home. Right now, there are criminals that obviously, file off the serial numbers to firearms. When somebody makes a gun in their own home, it doesn't necessarily have a serial number on it, but they're conflating both these two things together as if it's one, and it's not. It's already illegal to sell a firearm or to take off the serial number from it. There are already laws on the books to take care of that. What he's trying to do is shut down the home making of firearms, because they know as they pass more and more restrictive laws and gun bans, people are going to make their own firearms anyway, and they can't control that. And so that's what this is all about.
And one of the things that his speech actually got a lot of notoriety for is where he started out saying that there is no absolute right to the Second Amendment. And one of the things that he used as a justification for that, and I just want to get this quote right because it was shocking to me. He said, in the very beginning of the Second Amendment, certain people were not allowed to have weapons. And that surprised me, because the people that weren't allowed, at least at the beginning of the country, were slaves, indentured servants, Native American populations, and other folks. So for him to evoke that dark history as a backbone for what he was saying was very disturbing to me. So I was wondering if you have any comments to some of his justifications to further restrictions.
Well, we all know that the history of gun control lies in the roots of, a lot of discrimination in the black codes and, discriminating against minorities. Likewise, in a lot of New York's gun control laws came about by discriminating against, immigrants coming in who are minorities from other countries. I think Biden, he's always done this thing where, I support the Second Amendment, and it's the but that's the big problem. He's arguing again, and then that nothing is absolute. Well, he said you can't yell fire in a crowded theater. That's true. You can't also take your gun and kill somebody with it. That's illegal. But owning a gun for law-abiding people is a whole nother story. And it's the right to keep bearer arms shall not be infringed. And Biden, in his mind, the word infringed is left out. And that's the problem we have in his whole giant, long-term career in government, is he's never, ever supported anything to do with gun rights and always supported anything to do with gun control or taking rights away. So what we're dealing with is a president with a long history of being, an enemy of the Second Amendment and the right of the people to keep and bear arms.
Actually, Mr. Gottlieb, that's a great point. And that leads me into one of my biggest criticisms of the Obama administration, that they were actually given this unique opportunity when the Heller decision was released in, I believe it was June of 2008. Within 6 months of him taking the oath, he had this opportunity to go out on the back of this law and really go after places that he even said overshot the runway with laws that were not common sense, that were too excessive, and start building a framework of trust with gun owners to get out there and then potentially get other restrictions that were limited, to create a coalition. And instead, during 8 years, he did nothing. Did anybody from the Biden administration reach out to you or any of the other leaders and ask what your opinion on any of these new regulations are and any of your concerns?
No, he met with no gun rights leaders or organizations anywhere in the country. He only reached out to the gun prohibition lobby. Those lobbying groups sat down and met with him and pretty much wrote his script for this. You referenced he had this chance after the Supreme Court ruled in the Heller decision that the Second Amendment is an individual right to do something about it. Well, he did. He came out and criticized the court and said they were wrong, meaning you don't have Second Amendment rights. So he doesn't want to come out and be totally against Second Amendment rights, when he's pushing his legislation. But the fact is, he is, and his past rhetoric, language, and actions have proven it.
And you've seen nothing from any of the conversations so far of him using the Justice Department to go after any kind of violations of Second Amendment rights, whether it be based on race or any other issues of discrimination.
I'm really glad you raised that, because when a criminal goes into a gun store, a disqualified individual, so a drug user goes into a gun store to buy a firearm and fills out the form saying they're not a criminal or not a drug user, it's a federal felony. And we have a situation with his son buying a firearm that way, lying on the federal form. You notice he's not being prosecuted. So this is very, very selective. And it's the elitist attitude that quite frankly, Joe Biden has had all along. And that's something that's very disturbing to gun owners, because a lot of our people are just common people. They're common laborers. They don't get any special treatment from government. And what we're looking at with this whole thing with gun control, it's a permission thing. And if you're in the right political mind, or you have the right connections, you might be able to get your gun. If you're not, you can't have one. Particularly if you're a minority, if you're African American, you're Asian, you're coming from South America. It's a problem, and we see this. And right now, we're seeing, like he talks about, criminals with guns. Last year, or actually, it's 2017 is the last year we have definitive data from the federal government. But there were, something like 22,000 people that tried to buy a firearm illegally in our country. Do you know how many of them got prosecuted? 12. I mean, this is the problem we face. It's like pass new laws restricting rights of law-abiding citizens and don't enforce the laws we have on the books against criminals. But one of the things that really bothers me, Timothy, about his proposals is one of them he's proposing is to use funding to encourage the states to find alternatives to gun violence outside of incarceration. So what he's talking about is letting violent criminals go free while he's trying to lock up our guns. Absolutely,
and I think that's a great point. In his speech, he gave lots of data with regards to people who were being blocked. We can go into whether that data was correct, if those were, false positives or whatever, but he didn't go into how many people were actually charged or let alone convicted as a result of bad guys trying to get guns. So I think that's an excellent point. And I think this also segues into the second half of what he was discussing of looking at what he was trying to push in Congress. And this is probably the biggest one of those is the background check laws. And you've been very vocal over the years in that you're not necessarily against background checks, but the devil's in the details of what's in those background checks. So can you talk a little bit about some of your concerns with the bill HR 8 and just some of the background check schemes that proponents for gun control acts are discussing in general?
I'd love to. The first big problem we have with the background checks is the database that you have to use for them. We have a very corrupted database that has a lot of false positives of people in the database that don't belong there. And when they try to buy a gun, they get denied. And when they get denied, it takes them 6 months, 8 months, 12 months to be able to get the records corrected if they're lucky. Some people never get their records corrected. So as you expand these background checks to more and more things and more and more places where guns are acquired, you create a bigger problem if you don't fix the database to begin with. And that's what we're very concerned about. The other thing is, as you expand the system for more background checks and you don't apply more money to it and more manpower to it, you have more delays and false denials in the system that you can't get fixed. That's another problem we have with it. And of course, the biggest problem is an awful lot of people who are criminals aren't in the database, or people who've been mentally adjudicated or have drug problems like Biden's son. So the problem is that they're able to walk out of the store with the firearm, because the database is so corrupted. So the database needs to be fixed first of all before you can do anything. If you don't fix the database, adding on to it only complicates the problems we have with it. The other thing we have is this expanded national database. It really is a national registration system. So they know who owns guns and where your guns are. And that's what this is all about, is they know they can't go to the next steps of bans and confiscations if you don't know who has the firearms. And so the devil, again, is always in the details. They're really creating a national registration system. And there are other problems with this as well that make it really futile. First of all, criminals don't get their guns mostly on the legal markets to begin with. They either steal them or get them on the black market. These laws don't apply to them because they're called criminals because they break laws. And so again, it just doesn't really work. And there's been no study that really shows these things have any effect, on it. If you stop a sale to somebody who's prohibited and you don't arrest them, you leave them on the street, they go find a gun another way. And so that's what concerns gun owners a whole lot. You make us a lot less safer by leaving these people out on the street, and then you take our rights away so we can't defend ourselves.
Exactly. And I don't understand too why there hasn't been, if you're looking to just make sure that good guys have guns, and you have, especially from the left's perspective, are really pushing a end to mass incarceration agenda, why aren't you adding something to this bill that says, hey, if you own a gun, if you're in Pennsylvania and you've bought a shotgun and you've had a background check and you're a good guy, you are now, and you've gone through a background checker system. If you then move to New Jersey or New York or Massachusetts, you then cannot be prosecuted for that possession because you're a good guy and there's no reason to prosecute you for lack of going through another draconian system. This is something that would actually protect gun owners. And so if that's their real intention, why haven't they incorporated that into any of this legislation?
Because it's not their real intention. The real intention is to get as many guns out of people's hands, out of civilian hands as possible. And that's what it's really all about. These people don't support gun ownership, period. They talk about how there's just too many guns in America. They don't care if all those guns are done by legalized, people who haven't broken laws, who pass background checks. They don't care. They don't really want anybody to have a gun.
All right, so moving on from the background checks, I also wanted to ask you about what your thoughts on David Chipman, who was the other, I pretty much know where you're going with this, but just to give an intro, he was in the ATF for about 25 years. Since leaving, he's been a consultant for the Gifford organization, which is one of the national gun control organizations. But what really surprised me about his nomination is that he has been a very outspoken apologist for the incident in Waco and a lot of the deaths that were there, which have in recent years become one of the real examples of police overreach and overuse of force, which in the Black Lives Matter movement and a lot of the efforts to reform police does not make him the prime suspect to run a law enforcement group for that. So I just wanted to know what your thoughts on him are.
Well, add to that the fact that he was also on Bloomberg's payroll at Every Town Against Gun Violence, advocating more and more gun restrictions as well. And he was also involved in Ruby Ridge, not just Waco. So the problem we have here is that you've got a guy who's been in two crazy enforcement actions against gun owners to begin with that got way out of hand. He's worked for two anti-gun groups involved in the gun prohibition lobby in our country. So quite frankly, my problem here is like having a pedophile in charge of child protective services. And
Exactly.
putting him in the head of ATF is nothing that the gun industry can tolerate or gun owners in general can tolerate. It's the worst choice he could have made. And he would have only made a choice like this if, in fact, he's 100% certified anti-gun rights.
I was just surprised because given everything that's come out, I mean, Netflix did a documentary in 2018 that really eviscerated the Fed's actions in that, and even Ruby Ridge, if we're taking media aside, the people that were involved in that case wound up suing successfully the ATF and winning. So that really surprised me.
And a woman and her child were killed. I mean, this is appalling to let this guy be head of an enforcement agency that needs the trust of the American people to be able to function. Putting him in charge of this, again, is like putting a pedophile child in charge of Child Protective Services.
Well, Mr. Gottlieb, I'm sure with everything going on, you have many other media matters to get to. Thank you so much for your time here. And again, I say this from a personal level and as well as on behalf of the tens of millions of gun owners who simply own firearms, exercise their rights, and don't do anything but be law-abiding citizens throughout this nation. Thank you for all your efforts. I know it's selfish work, and if there's any other last comments that you have on the way out, we'd really appreciate it.
Well, I just want to thank you for all your kind words and have me on the program so I could get more information out to people who need it. Thank you very, very much.
Well, thank you again, and please, everybody, join us on our Patreon community page, as well as checking out other content that we've produced on both Rumble and YouTube. Thank you very much.